Today's sermon is called Seeing is Believing. And a guy by the name of Warren Webster knew a Muslim that accepted Christ. And they asked the Muslim, some of his friends asked him, well, why did you wind up accepting Christ? And the gentleman said, well, it's like this. Suppose you were going down a road and suddenly the road forked in two directions. And you didn't know which way to go. And there at the fork in the road, there was two men. And one of the men was dead and the other man was alive. Which one would you ask for directions? And years ago when I was at a fork in the road in my life, I made the same choice as our Muslim friend did. And I asked Jesus for help in my life, and my life has never been the same. And now somehow in ways my mind can't necessarily fathom, this same man who walked the earth thousands of years ago is alive inside of my heart. It amazes me. He is alive inside of my heart. I feel his presence. I hear his voice, and I see his hand in operation around me. And I may never be able to convince anyone else that he's alive, but I know this. I am convinced he is who he says he is. He is Jesus the Christ. He is the only Son of God the Father, our Creator. And I believe that he was sent to earth to die for the sins of man so that every man would have a chance to be reunited with his and or her Maker. And I believe that unlike me, that he was sinless. And therefore, when he was crucified, death couldn't legally hold him in the ground. And so he rose from the grave and he lives today. And that is everything that we're celebrating today. And those are the things that I believe. If you will, that's my statement of faith. But I'm probably like you. I haven't always felt that way. And I've had my share of questions. I've had my share of doubts along the way. The things that we read and hear about Jesus saying and doing are so outside of our natural life, they are hard to fully believe. They are hard to believe at times. And if it's any consolation, though, you and I are not alone in having this disbelief. And in fact, even his original disciples, remember the 12 disciples that started following him? Well, after Jesus died, it went down to 11 because Judas went out and hung himself. Remember, Judas betrayed Jesus, then he went out and hung himself. And after he died, even those original 11 disciples had their share of doubt. And I've been reading about that. And I've been thinking, well, what should we talk about this Easter? And so rather than trying to prove and prove and prove again that Jesus really did raise from the dead, we're going to look at how the disciples reacted that morning when that stone was rolled away and the tomb where Jesus was buried was found empty. And so our big idea today is this. We're going to look at something that the remaining 11 disciples had that Jesus called unbelief and hardness of heart. All right, so let's get our bearings. Let's begin to read what transpired after Jesus rose from the dead. And in the first gospel called Matthew, we read this in Matthew 28, 16 and 17. It said, the 11 disciples proceeded to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had designated. But when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some were doubtful. They worshiped, but some were doubtful. That doesn't really sound too bad to me. I mean, it's not pretty unusual, this event that's taking place. It's not every day that someone rises from the dead. In fact, it's never a day that someone rises from the dead, right? When you're dead, that's it. You don't see them above the ground again. And so it's natural to have some questions. So I kind of understood that. Let's see what the other accounts say. In the Gospel of Luke, we read about these same events. Luke 24, verse 9 through 11. And they returned from the tomb and reported all these things to the 11, the same 11, and to all the rest. Now they were Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of Jesus. Also the other women with them were telling these things to the apostles. But these words appeared to them as nonsense. and they would not believe them. Now, this account sounds a little more harsh, doesn't it? The first one, they had doubt. Now, this one sounds a little more harsh. The women are telling them what they saw with their own eyes, and the disciples aren't believing it. And lastly, we're going to look at the Gospel of Mark. And in Mark chapter 16, verses 9 through 11, this is what it says. He first appeared to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went and reported to those who had been with him while they were mourning and weeping. And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they refused to believe it. And then if we read a little further, it would tell us in Mark 16:13 that he appeared to 2 others, and when they reported to the disciples, they didn't believe them guys either. And lastly, we read this in Mark 16:14. Afterwards, Jesus appeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at table. That meant that they were eating dinner. They were reclining at table, and he reproached them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who had seen him after he had risen. Okay, let's put together what we know so far. These men and women who had walked and talked with Jesus, who had seen with their own eyes all of the wonders and miracles, still would not bring themselves to believe in Jesus, even though he was standing right in front of them. And his rebuke, which means to be corrected, in his rebuke, Jesus points out to them that the reason they don't believe is a lack of faith. And that's a problem that we all have. That's this problem of a lack of faith, and this problem called a hardness of heart. Now, I put it up on the screen. What is hardness of heart? Well, the Bible also often uses parts of the human anatomy to define the whole person. As an example, maybe you have heard that someone is stiff-necked. What does that mean? It means that they're stubborn. It means that they're stubborn and they're unyielding. And many times the Bible will use the heart. In fact, most of the time, the Bible will use the heart to describe the life of a man or a woman. The heart in the Bible is often used to describe the seat of all of our emotions, our intelligence, our morality, our choices. It defines our spiritual life. And so the heart in the Bible represents the whole person and their total response to life, right? And so it's their response not only to life around them and people around them, it also is their response to the spiritual and moral demands that God places in front of us. And so when the Bible talks about hardness of heart, it is describing a negative condition right up here. It's describing a negative condition where a person ignores, spurns, or rejects the gracious offer of God to be part of his or her life. And people suffer, all of us suffer from hardness of heart. Sometimes it's because of sinful rebellion against God. Other times it might be bitterness over our circumstances. Other times it's sheer self-will or selfishness or any combination or all 3 together. And remember how I said we all struggle with it? And we all do. Here's some examples that you and I wrestle with hardness of heart. Has someone ever offended you and you weren't able to forgive them? You weren't able to say, I forgive you? Here's why. That's hardness of heart. We wrestle with hardness of heart when someone hurts us and we don't want to forgive them, even though they have asked us for forgiveness. That's hardness of heart. We wrestle with hardness of heart when we know our actions are hurting another person, and yet we selfishly continue to do them. That's hardness of heart. And in this case, yes, we wrestle with hardness of heart when we refuse to believe in a God who does not lie and who gains nothing from our trusting in him other than the opportunity to bring his presence into our lives and make us better. That's hardness of heart. And I know that all of us have experienced and are experiencing these. And so when I read these accounts of the men and women of Jesus' day who wrestled with hardness of heart, I wonder just how many of us would be able to, that Jesus would be able to rebuke. How many of us would need corrected for the same thing, not really believing everything we've been told about Jesus and therefore not putting our faith in God? I'd probably get corrected for that. How about you guys? The Bible says something else about our hearts. There's this hardness of heart, but the Bible says something else. The Bible says that our hearts are deceitful inside of us. Our hearts are deceitful. Just because we feel it doesn't necessarily make it true. I'll let that sink in for a minute, and then I'll give you an example. Just because you feel something or you think it doesn't necessarily make it true. As an example, there was a woman in a support group meeting where she was asked to describe herself to the rest of the group. Tell us a little bit about yourself, right? So she began and she described herself. Eventually, when this was all done, she described herself as a complete failure at everything that she had ever attempted to do. Just terrible, just complete failure. And then people started asking questions and trying to find out more of why she felt this about herself. And after further questioning, they found out that she had received her MBA in business. They found out that she was the head of a large and prosperous company, and she held multiple civic positions. And in the eyes of everyone except herself, she was considered to be extremely successful and well-liked. But her heart told her otherwise. Her heart told her otherwise. She was deceived by her own heart. So even our hearts can deceive us, how do we know who and what we can trust? If our own hearts will deceive us, where can we go to find truth? What can we know that we can trust? Well, we can trust what we read in the pages of this Bible, and here's why. The Bible is one of the most thoroughly vetted and verified documents in the history of mankind. It has been proven accurate and true by archaeologists and historians time and time again. So listen, in a court of law, they say it's not what you know it's true, it's what you can prove. It's not what you know is true, it's what you can prove. And proof in a court of law is provided by two primary components. Proof is provided through eyewitnesses and through written documentation. Everyone here know who Judge Judy is? Every once in a while I'll come home and I'll turn on and Judge Judy will be on TV. Now she's a trip. You know, she's a trip. And I mean, she just keeps everyone in line. Anyway, sometimes I'll turn her on. She'll be on TV. And I've noticed that if you watch that show long enough, if you've seen it a few times, she will always ask for documents proving the claimant's case, right? Oh, they violated your lease? Show me a copy of the lease. Oh, that repair cost $500? Show me a copy of the bill for $500. Why? The reason she does that is because written, verifiable documentation is the key component to establishing if something is true or not. And the other, of course, is an eyewitness, right? Someone who was there, someone who had seen it for themselves, someone who can validate that an event or an action occurred because they saw it with their own eyes or they had a verbal documentation, an eyewitness and documentation that corroborates. Well, then you can determine if something's true or not. And you know what? The Bible gives us both. The Bible. Did you ever ask yourself, for those of you who have read your Bible, we have those Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? We've heard of them, right? Have you ever asked yourself why there are all these different accounts of Jesus doing the same thing? In other words, why do 4 different authors of the New Testament write down the same account as all the other authors? Why do they do that? We can read some of the same events and miracles in the first gospel called Matthew, and then we can find that same event or miracle in Mark, Luke, and John after. They're all there. Why? Because the gospels give us that verifiable written documentation that validates those events as true. And you know, there's something else. If you're reading your Bible and you read the miracles and all these things, there's always something else you see, and that's eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses. Jesus performed some kind of miracle, and we read how people marveled at what happened, or that this person or that person was there watching it all unfold, right? And why do we read about them? Because they are the eyewitnesses of the events that could be called upon to verify them as truly happening. They were there, they saw it, and they could testify that it's true. Now, if you are a conspiracy theorist, If you're a conspiracy theorist or just looking for excuses not to believe what the Bible says, you might say this is just some grand and elaborate scheme. And well, maybe it is, but it's doubtful, and here's why. Here's why. The Bible was written over a span of 1,500 years, written by 40 different authors in different parts of the known world at that time. That would be a pretty hard deception to coordinate. That would be something to pull together. And there's a lot more I could say about this, but really that's not where our problem lies, is it? It's not that we don't think the Bible is true. Let us just suffice to say that when we read the Bible, we are literally reading the God-inspired documentation of evidence that is needed to prove the things we read about him are true. And all the evidence and the verification done by the experts for hundreds and hundreds of years or more have concluded the Bible is something that we can rely on. The wording is accurate. The truth is eternal. And yet, we choose not to believe it. We choose not to believe it. And Jesus said it's because of a hardness of heart, a stubborn refusal to believe. So I guess we are very much like those disciples of Jesus in that day that we just read about. Men who had walked with him for 3 years of ministry, who had seen firsthand miracles and wonders. They heard the things that Jesus spoke, the things that we only read about. They actually heard. And yet they didn't believe when he rose from the dead, just as he said he would. And when Jesus came to them after the resurrection, he didn't try to reprove himself. He didn't try to reteach them everything that he had already taught them. He didn't lay out all of the evidence of his purpose and existence again. He simply corrected them for their unbelief and hardness of his heart. And he said, you know what? You're wrong for not trusting me. That's what it came down to. You're wrong for not trusting me. And all of these things that I've been talking about now brings me to a question for you and I. And here's what it is. What does it take for you to believe? What does it take for you to believe what God is saying? How much do you have to see? When is enough enough? In the disciples' case and ours, it's not that there isn't enough evidence to prove what we hear and read about Jesus is true. It's that we make our hearts hard towards it. And we just stubbornly refuse to place our trust in a God who only speaks truth. And so today, I'm asking you to do something. I'm asking you to put your trust in this man called Jesus. That's what the whole goal of our message is today. I know you have questions. I know you have doubts. I have. We all do. Anytime a mortal man begins to wrestle with the thought of an eternal God, we are going to have questions. Our mind simply cannot fathom everything that God has and does for us and in us. We just can't get it. Questions are inevitable. And you know what? Questions are good. God gave you an intellect that he wants you to use to find him and the truth that he has for your life. So questions are okay. That's fine. But you got to start somewhere. You got to start somewhere. And if you're really all about finding the truth, and if seeing is believing, and you need evidence that you can trust, well, you're not going to be able to find something more thoroughly tested and verified statements of truth than are found in this book right here called the Bible, which is somewhere in your house, on a nightstand, in a cabinet, wherever. This is where the truth is. And this Bible tells us that without Jesus in control of our lives, our eternal future is hopeless. Let that thing sink in. Without Jesus in control of your life, your eternal and my eternal future is hopeless. This Bible tells us that without Jesus in control of our lives, we will continue to experience the consequences and the weight of our sin in our lives. And it's not that there isn't enough evidence to prove what we hear and read about Jesus it's true. It's just we make our hearts hard toward that message. We make our hearts hard towards that truth. This book tells us that without Jesus in control of our lives, we can amass all this world has to offer and yet completely miss the fulfillment and purpose that God has designed specifically and personally for us. And this book tells us that when we choose to soften our hearts, when we choose to wrestle a little bit with our unbelief, that Jesus will begin to answer our questions. He will begin to guide us into truth, and he will begin to change us from the inside out, just like he did the original disciples in that day. And that's exactly what he did. Those disciples made a choice from that moment on to believe that everything that he had spoken was real. And man, look what happened to them after that. They took off. I mean, they understood that this God and everything that they had seen was trustworthy, believable. But it all started when they softened their hearts to the invitation that God had before them. And so, on this day when we're celebrating this new life, I'm asking you to soften your heart. And I'm asking you, listen, I'm asking you to reconsider your position of holding Jesus at arm's length from your life. Stop holding him away from you like he's something bad for you. You're just shooting yourself in the foot. You're making your life worse instead of better. But you're never going to know that that's true until you say, Jesus, come in and do whatever you got to do in me. I'm asking you to trust what he says is true, that he loves you and he wants to be a part of your life every day. Let's stand. Maybe you have asked him into your heart. Maybe you haven't. This word is true. If you haven't, we need to. If I haven't, I need to. If you haven't, you need to. The consequences are inevitable if we don't. So let's bow our heads and let's really be honest with ourselves. Is it that we don't believe what God says, or are we just making excuses because we don't want to surrender? Is it that we really don't believe what God says? We haven't seen enough evidence. We can't we'll believe in UFOs, but we won't believe in a God that doesn't lie. And let's square up today with God. Let's get on the same page as him. He loves you. He wants to be in your life every day. Stop holding him away. So I'm going to lead us in this prayer. If my words work for you, great. If not, talk to God on your own. Heavenly Father, we recognize that we don't believe you or trust you as we should. We recognize, Lord, sometimes it's because we are rebellious. We want to do things our way, and we don't want anyone, including you, our Creator, to tell us how to live our lives. We want what we want when we want it. And if it's not what you want, then, well, I guess that means, God, that we put ourselves on the throne of life instead of you. So, Father, we recognize that we're rebellious. And, Father, we also recognize that sometimes we're just stubborn and we're selfish. And for these reasons, God, not necessarily because we don't know what you say is true, but these things, these flaws inside of us has caused us to keep you at arm's length when you want to embrace us. It's caused us to miss out on the life that you've had for us, that you say is good, that you say is not just good, but it's great. And Lord, every day as we walk this earth without you in our heart is one more day we come closer to an eternity without you. One more day that we miss the things that you have for us, the strength that you have for us, the hope that you have for us, the wisdom that you have for us. So God, whatever list that we're using as our reasons to reject you being the king of our life, well, we give them up to you right now. And so, Lord, for everyone and anyone that's hearing this message, I ask that you would come into their hearts in a new and renewed way, That, Father, that you would revive the hearts inside of us, that we would surrender ourselves to you, and in the process, find new life. And to each person here, I ask that you would bless them with hope, Lord God, and with strength. Thank you for this holiday. Thank you for this Resurrection Sunday. And I ask that you bless each one of these good folk in Jesus' name.